Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 160, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. Woo! It is the hot indictment summer. It rolls on. Woo! Man, former president facing some more indictments. This time, Georgia's version. What a tough summer the former president Donald Trump is having. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But first, take a deep breath. Whew, a lot of news to get into. I hope you all been having a good week. It has been hot out there, not just a hot indictment summer. It is hot, period. Trying to stay cool here in Holy City Centerland, not spending much time outside. Not that I'm frequently out there anyway with all my internet work I do. And my propensity to want to be left alone in my house, all snuggled up in a blanket. No, I like to go out and do stuff, but not in this heat. Man, like I said on the last episode, went out on Sunday with a friend and sat outside because she had her dog with her. And even later on in the evening, 7 p.m. and on, it was still so hot out. And I can't imagine those of you who have to work outside or spend any amount of time out in this heat. So I hope you're staying cool and staying safe. And like I mentioned in the last episode, make sure your pets are too, especially those pets that maybe are normally outside a lot or often. So just stay safe and stay cool out there. Other than that, not a whole lot going on. Some big news on the horizon, but it'll be a little bit before I can officially talk about it. But be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on all things going on here in Holy City Center land. But with that, let's not waste any more time. We got to get into the news. I don't want to dwell on the topic of Donald Trump, but it is hard not to talk about him and what has been going on this summer, as this is, as always with him, everything he has done, everything that happens to him or because of him is unprecedented. We have never seen something like we are seeing in this country currently. All these indictments, all of them happening within months of each other. This is big news, and I know some of you are, I don't know if excited or happy is the right word. I mean, who wishes we ended up in this position, of course, but I know because of things that have happened, there are some people who are happy about this. There are others that are upset and think this is a travesty. And there's some who are like, I don't even care. I'm just so sick of hearing about it. I get that. I get that. Believe me. But this is big and it deserves to be talked about, not just because it's happening in nearby Georgia, but also because it's a big national story that has implications for this country in general in terms of the upcoming election. It's just wild. I know we've kind of gotten used to these 24-hour news cycles and everything seems to be breaking news and everything is gigantic and earth-shattering, or at least we're made to believe it is. But this truly is. These indictments, regardless of how they play out, these are big moments. And so I wanted to talk about it and just kind of hit the big bullet points, because I know a lot of people have either avoided the news, don't really want to watch or read or go online. So I'm just going to try to hit the big bullet points that you need to know. So Donald Trump and 18 allies were indicted in Georgia on Monday over their efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss in the state. Prosecutors used a statute that is normally associated with like gangsters and mobsters to accuse the former president, some lawyers, and other aides of a, quote, criminal enterprise, end quote, to keep him in power. So that statute that I referenced is RICO cases, is what they're known as. You may have heard them watching documentaries, TV shows, movies, whatever. They're racketeering. And yeah, usually you associate those things with some of the mob bosses of yesteryear, or actually even some in recent years being charged with racketeering type charges. But yeah, you're not used to seeing a president being charged with these types of things. It hasn't happened before, actually. So this nearly 100-page indictment detailed dozens of acts by Trump and his allies to undo his defeat, including imploring Georgia's Republican Secretary of State to find enough votes for him to win the battleground state. You may remember that infamous call where he said something along the lines of, we just need to find X amount of votes. That's what that's referencing. There's also allegations that either Trump or some of these allies harassed an election worker who faced false claims of fraud. There's also allegations of an attempt to persuade Georgia lawmakers to ignore the will of voters and appoint a new slate of electoral college electors that are favorable to Trump. This has been kind of commonly known as the fake elector scheme. And there's one really brazen episode. I mean, all of these, if true, now again, all of these, although it's detailed in the indictment, he deserves his day in court. We'll find out for sure, what ends up happening. So these are all alleged. But if this is true, this is particularly brazen. I mean, they all are to some extent. But there was one allegation that outlined a plot that involved one of Trump's lawyers trying to access voting machines in a rural Georgia county in an attempt to steal data from a voting machine company. These are the types of allegations you saw in 2020 when people were trying to say that Democrats or people who wanted Joe Biden to win were doing these types of things, like accessing voting machines, trying to steal data and all that other stuff. And now we hear, well, actually, it was some folks in Trump's orbit that may have been doing that. Again, allegedly. So who are these other defendants? Unlike some of the other indictments we've seen, particularly the Jack Smith one, where they only indicted Trump and there was a bunch of what are known as unindicted co-conspirators. This one actually, as I mentioned, included 18 other folks. Jack Smith's investigation, the thought that I've heard from different pundits and things is that he and his team didn't want to include all these unindicted co-conspirators, at least at first, because they wanted this trial to go quickly. The more people involved with it, the longer it could drag out. They wanted to just go after the main person and get the trial done as quickly as possible, regardless of the outcome, before the 2024 election. So it appears Georgia did not care about anything like that, although they have set an ambitious timeline for this case. They did include some co-conspirators. Other defendants include White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump attorney and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Trump administration Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, and also there's some other lawyers' names that you've heard: John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro, or however you pronounce his last name. I'm still not entirely sure on that. It kind of looks like Cheeseboro. But in any event, they were all charged, among others. You can see the full list via the link in the show notes. Now, Georgia officials say that the defendants would be permitted to voluntarily surrender by noon on August 25th. So they have until that time and date to surrender themselves in this case. So all of those folks, including Donald Trump, have to surrender themselves by that time. They also said there are plans to seek a trial date within 6 months and that they intend to try the defendants collectively. Very ambitious when you have this many people involved, but we'll see how that goes. And as I've said, this is not even the first indictment the former president has faced. This is the fourth such indictment this summer. And it comes just 2 weeks after the Justice Department special counsel charged him in a vast conspiracy to overturn the election as well. That's the Jack Smith investigation I was just mentioning. So if you would like to read the nearly 100-page indictment yourself, see the official list of charges, and different defendants are facing different charges, visit the link in the show notes. It's also all over every news organization that's out there, so you can get some more information. But this is a big deal. I mean, they all are. Anytime we're talking about the legal system and a former president being indicted, which, again, never happened before, at least on the federal level, it's a big deal, regardless of what side of the fence you're on. Either you just, if you can look at it just from a historical perspective with politics out of it, this is a big deal. And more importantly, the end result will be an even bigger deal. And the reverberations from that will be massive, regardless of which way it goes. So, we're in for the long haul here. The Donald Trump story is not going to be going anywhere for a long, long time for those who are tired of him or tired of the criticisms of him or whatever it may be. This is just another example of where you're going to be dealing with court cases and appeals and legal maneuvering and truth social posts from the former president. Who knows what else? We're a long way from being done, but that's the gist of what occurred earlier this week. Again, regardless of what you feel about Trump, about the case, etc., it's a big deal, and there'll be a lot to be discussed and hashed out as we go forward. But it's been a wild summer in terms of politics, nationally, locally, and it has it's showing no signs of slowing down. So buckle up. We are in for quite the ride. All right, let's get back here locally. I mentioned on the last podcast there was an update on that Isle of Palms mass shooting that occurred back in April. I mentioned that the police had arrested an 18-year-old and said that he was the shooter. This was the first person to be arrested and charged with the shooting itself. There had been other arrests on other charges, but it seemed in the initial reports that that's what the police were alleging, and they have come out since I recorded the podcast and had a press conference and provided updates, and that is exactly what they're saying. So, Isle of Palms police have also said they recovered the actual gun that was used in that April beach shooting that injured 5 people, and they linked it to this 18-year-old whose name is Davion Bobby Delshawn Singleton. They charged him with 5 counts of attempted murder, 2 gun charges, and a count of possession of a stolen vehicle. Chief Kevin Cornett said in a press conference on August 14th, which was Monday, that Singleton is the shooter. Now, Cornett did say the department is still investigating the shooting and the events that led up to it, but he wanted to make sure that he let the press know, and obviously the public by extension, that they are not currently looking for any other shooters. They have determined that he is the one. All of the shots fired, according to them, came from Singleton. He also declined to really provide too many other details, including a motive. All he really said that some of these teens were involved in different disputes, and that's all he would really say on the topic. So if you don't remember, the shooting involved mostly teenagers. It was a senior skip day. There was at least a couple different schools there. Supposedly there was some beef between however many students. And that's what kind of led up to this, although we don't know the exact details, but that's the gist of it. And so that is the current update we have on the situation. And like I said, that's what it seemed like when the arrest was first announced, but I just wanted to kind of rehash it, go back and just say definitively, this is what the police said at a press conference and subsequent updates since I had it on the last podcast. So again, somewhat surprising, I think, but I think, it took a little while, but people are happy that the alleged shooter is in custody and will be facing, some kind of consequence for the alleged actions. There is currently a grassroots movement being led by small business owners and some other community members across South Carolina that are looking to undo what they say is damage done by the 2017 passage of a state liquor liability insurance law. So, what are liability insurance laws as it relates to liquor and businesses that serve it? You may have seen in cases nationally and here locally, I've even talked about some of them. For instance, that accident that occurred on Folly Beach, where a woman was arrested and charged with DUI, amongst other charges, when she hit that golf cart like vehicle that included a wedding party and killed the bride. The surviving members of the family, including her husband, are looking into, in addition to suing and trying to get damages from the from Jamie Komorowski, the woman who hit them. They're also going after the businesses that might have served her alcohol that evening. There's been other cases like this where local restaurants and bars have been sued, um, alleging that they overserved someone, or in the Murdoch boat crash case, saying that they provided alcohol to a minor and didn't do a good job of realizing he wasn't using his own ID. You see things like this a lot, and this is what it's referencing, that if someone is arrested for something like DUI or anything that involves the crime has to do with them being grossly intoxicated, um, someone, if an injured party, can go after those businesses and restaurants for damages. And again, we've seen this a little bit. Sometimes you don't hear about it. It stays quiet because a lot of times restaurants or bars or whatever will settle kind of quietly, just try to make it go away instead of actually going to court. But every once in a while they fight it and you hear about it and it moves forward. So there's some people who are saying that these liability rates are just way too much and it's going to cause businesses to not be able to operate. So the law in question is S-116, and it requires all bars, restaurants, and venues that serve alcohol after 5 p.m. to carry a $1 million liability insurance policy. This measure, as I kind of mentioned, was meant to protect victims of drunk driving and their families. But these organizers with the grassroots organization that's calling themselves SC Venue Crisis say the measure was, is missing some key language in their minds that should be aimed to prevent this legislation from being exploited to the detriment of business owners. One of the organizers said that the insurance policy is typical in business. It's normal to have this coverage. But when there's no percentage of fault rules attached to it, you can be held responsible for that entire $1 million. So, my understanding from this and looking into it is that there's no percentage of fault rules. What does that mean? If one business can't pay their share, if there's multiple defendants, so if multiple bars and restaurants or whatever combination are being sued in a particular case, if one, can't meet their can't meet what they're supposed to pay, or if there's some question to that, the other businesses might have to make up for that total amount. And there isn't any way, because there's no percentage of fault rule. That also means that, if somebody goes to a bar, orders 2 drinks, and then moves on, orders 12 drinks at the next bar, and then 5 more at the one after that, they're all equally liable. So instead of being like, well, that first bar, are they really liable at all? Maybe if they are, they sold them 2 drinks. Maybe we can say they're like 5% at fault. I don't know. This is me kind of spitballing almost, but that's the understanding I have, that there are rules in place where although multiple businesses might be at fault, some could be held more at fault, and then they'll have to pay more given that. But when there isn't that kind of rule attached, they can all be held equally accountable and have to pay that $1 million. So that is the case here in South Carolina. Multiple establishments can be held 100% liable in a lawsuit. And that's what organizers are saying is the real problem. It's not that they don't want to have the coverage, and not that they don't think that people should be held responsible in their industry. But it's just that it's not as fair as it should be in their minds, and could potentially harm business. In addition to that, the other issue that they say is that the liability policies in this state, the average cost is skyrocketed. That it started, somewhere between $2,000 to $5,000 and is now up to $25,000. And there are some business owners that have said they've struggled to find rates that are below $100,000. So there's a pretty big range there to go from $2,000 to $5 several years ago to $25,000 to over $100,000. Those are huge amounts of money for businesses to pay. And so that was the other problem that they're saying. These higher costs are threatening to close businesses. So even ones that are doing everything right don't ever have to worry about being sued. I mean, I guess again, though, it's possible. I don't know how likely they would be to a conviction in that make believe scenario I gave, where the first bar gives someone, sells someone 2 drinks. Should they really be held responsible for that person's actions after that? Obviously there's some questions, and that can work its way through the legal system. But, so businesses who tend to do the right thing and may never face a lawsuit still have to pay these astronomical rates. And that's a big problem for them as well. So that is what this group is alleging. It's interesting. I didn't know much about these laws here in South Carolina. I certainly didn't know how much businesses had to pay for that liability insurance. And it's something I think worth discussing. I think most people, vast majority of people, agree that certain businesses could and should be held responsible for certain things. So I think this is an interesting discussion, and I definitely want to learn more about it, and I'm curious to see where this goes going forward. So, if you have any thoughts on this, please share on social media, shoot me an email, whatever. I'm interested to see what other people think, especially those in the food and bev industry. We have some breaking news as I am recording this podcast. And of course, it involves the Murdoch family, doesn't it always? So let me update you on the latest court case. Not going to dive too much into this at the moment, as it's just breaking. But a judge has just handed down a sentence to a former Low Country attorney who pleaded guilty in May after being accused of conspiring with Alec Murdoch to take money from the estate of Murdoch's former housekeeper. So this is the Gloria Satterfield case, the housekeeper who fell down some stairs. Murdoch said he would get a payment for her family because he had insurance. He said he'd take care of it, and he never gave them the money. This lawyer who was sentenced today, is his name is Cory Fleming. You may remember that if you paid any attention to the case. He pled guilty in May, and today finally was given his punishment. A federal judge decided to sentence him to 4 years in prison, and he also has to pay $102,000 in restitution, as well as a fine of $20,000. As I mentioned, Fleming pleaded guilty in May, and the official charge was conspiracy to commit fraud. So that's just breaking now. Depending if I feel after reading through the whole thing, if there's more to discuss, I might revisit this on a later podcast. But that's the headline basically. Cory Fleming, a Murdoch accomplice, officially sentenced to 4 years in prison, and he'll have to pay $102,000 in restitution, as well as a fine of $20,000. All right, the last story, moving away from find out season and hot indictment summer to something a little bit more fun and pretty interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about it, as one, we're running out of time, and two, I think it's a good article that you should just read on your own. So ESPN, the sports network, of course, over the years since this movie came out, this movie called Dodgeball, a true underdog story. It's the one with Vince Vaughn, and several other actors, Justin Long, Stephen Root, and I'm forgetting some of the others that are in it. It was a comedy film, and one of the jokes in there was that there was this TV station, ESPN 8. Remember, ESPN for a while there was just expanding. ESPN News, ESPN Deportes, ESPN 2. And actually, I think they still have most of those networks. The joke was that there was an ESPN 8, and it was called the Ocho. And it was just a running joke. And it was like, they had so many channels that the Ocho was like these ridiculous sports, like dodgeball, for instance. And I say ridiculous in the sense that not the traditional, hockey, baseball, football, basketball, Olympics, things like we're used to seeing mainstream on not just ESPN, but all sports networks. And so ESPN decided to lean into that, and they do an annual event that's dedicated to 43 straight hours of niche sports. So you'll see things like wiffle ball, competitive Excel. Yes, that's really a thing, amongst others. But one in particular is what we're going to be talking about today, which is pillow fighting. Yes, that is right. So not only did the Ocho, ESPN 8, during this promotion, show pillow fighting on the network, it took place here in South Carolina back on August 4th in Rock Hill. That ESPN was in town, and they were doing some of their programming there. And yes, they broadcast a pillow fighting competition. The pictures themselves are funny. I need to go look up video and see this, but I highly recommend that you visit the link in the show notes, visit the story about pillow fighting that took place in Rock Hill. It's pretty funny and a nice change of pace from some of the other things we've been talking about. So go check it out. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Stay cool out there. Try not to get indicted this summer. It doesn't look like it's a whole lot of fun. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can listen again on Friday and you won't miss out on any news. Thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode, as well as a big thank you going out to Cole Collins, who edits each episode of Holy City Center Radio. If you would like to help, go to patreon.com/holycitycenter or holycitycenter.com/shop. You can pick up some merchandise at the latter and show it off to your friends. Who wouldn't be jealous of a Holy City Center hat or t-shirt or koozie or matches or, whatever else you decide to purchase. But if you can't purchase or sign up for a support tier on Patreon, it's totally okay. I get it. You can help out in lots of free ways. Like I said, subscribing, liking, reviewing, rating the podcast. All of these things help. You can also just simply send it to someone who you think might be interested in listening. Thank you again. I can't wait to talk to you on Friday. Until then, good night and good luck.